Welcome to the Beef Fuse podcast. My name is Don, and today we're going to be talking about finding healthy solutions to eat and the brand Peqish Foods with Dr. Anthony Marotta. So with that, welcome, Anthony. Welcome back.
Thanks, Don. It's great to be back.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so I think today's conversation will be really interesting just overall in terms of the brand that you have and everything that you have going on at Peqish as well. So maybe we should just start with, how did Peqish come to life?
Good question. Actually, one of the things how it arose was I was actually in the UK and staying a few blocks away from Buckingham Palace, and I was there on business, and I ordered room service, and I was taken back by the room service prices. This is when I just kind of had effectively started my professional career as an executive, and so I kind of had sticker shock with room service, and I'm like, okay, let me go out for a walk and grab something for lunch the next day because I was, staying in London over the weekend, and I happened to come across a UK favorite known as Pret a Manger, and was very pleasantly surprised at not only how it tasted, the overall quality, but also, the affordability aspect. And, again, every time I was in the UK, it was kind of my regular go-to for coffee or for lunch. And, kind of coming back to Vancouver here in Canada, there was a gap in the marketplace for a proposition like Pret a Manger. So we worked. I had the pleasure of bringing in a few of my colleagues, and we co-founded the company and opened up our doors in 2014 with a similar concept of grab and go, but with a unique kind of, addition to the model where we would actually bring in more of our clinical and scientific acumen as a team to build out what we would consider as healthier propositions for consumers to have.
Interesting. So people can, in your local market, people can go and sort of grab and go the foods that Peqish offers.
Yeah, so we actually, had endeavored to open up multiple retail outlets, but when we launched, the receptivity was so great that we actually started getting other entities approaching us, asking us if we wanted to distribute our products within their locations. And so we pivoted slightly away from the traditional bricks and mortar to more of a, let's say wholesaler or manufacturer where we would supply the products to others to retail and make available for their audience or for their community. And we thought that was actually great because we could reach more people with that modality through a distribution model.
Interesting. And then what are the key differentiating points overall for Peqish versus other brands that are on the market?
Yeah, great question. We take a lot of pride in what we do and how we actually formulate, food, so to speak. And so, with that, again, there's been some really interesting, how shall I put it, things that have come to light for me, like with the current food system by, operating in that space. And I'd say one of the biggest issues for us and the biggest obstacle or challenge really centers on, the selection of ingredients that we use. And, I know we've talked a little bit about this, together, but for example, just something as simple as ham, right, that people consume as a processed deli meat. I've struggled to find ham that we actually would certify and qualify as being suitable to put within our products. And people might be astonished, with that, but within the ecosystem, I've only been able to identify today one manufacturer and one product, like ham product, that actually meets our desired product specifications. Because when you look at it, and again, looking at traditional guidance from WHO years back, in the increased risk, for example, with colorectal cancer and nitrates and all this stuff, again, really look at this very stringently. And so again, something as simple as that, like again, there's only one entity that actually will work with for our ham. And I encourage, if someone is making ham, reach out to us, because we'd love to look at their product, because again, on our end, it's we're very passionate about ingredient selection. So if I can find other vendors that meet arguably a similar quality, from a quality standpoint, we'd certainly be welcome to entertaining, utilizing their product. So that's the first thing. And when I look at that, it's quite insidious in terms of what happens in the food ecosystem, where again, looking at product quality, it's a big obstacle. I'd say more often than not, as Peqish, we actually have to make our own ingredients, because the stuff that's out there, you know, in the ecosystem generally doesn't meet our specifications. So there's that. And then again, as we begin to develop a recipe, we'll actually run theoretical studies to look at exactly, what is the total calorie, how much fiber is there, how much protein, is the sodium like too high, et cetera, et cetera. How much, sugar, for example, is bioavailable, to be absorbed, so to speak, overall carbohydrate load. And, again, with that, then you also look at, vitamin profiles as well, to see if you can actually maximally nutrify a food, for consumption. So we look at that. And then obviously when you reduce it into practice, you also want to make sure that the food tastes good. Otherwise, no one will eat it.
Right. And I mean, in terms of let's go back to ham just for a second. So in terms of
Sure.
ham, what is it specifically that sort of removes a lot of the products from the, I guess from the ability to be selected from Peqish?
Yeah, again, there's over 2,500 chemicals and additives that
Hmm.
theoretically are approved for use. And a lot of times they're just when you're buying a product, it's not just meat, it's derivatives of like other ingredients and chemicals. And I think again too, like even looking at it, I'm kind of astonished at are we eating like food, or are we actually basically eating more, consuming more chemicals? And so that's a big differentiator for us. And again too, like the just salad dressings, like every ingredient is laden with chemicals, and on our end we really try to avoid that, because you know uh, from our perspective, we don't want people to be consuming chemicals. We want them to be consuming food that's wholesome, that's minimally processed, and is of nutritive value for the end consumer. So
And do
it's
you
it's a big obstacle.
do you think that the chemicals come from something that was already in the pig before they were slaughtered, or do you think it was something that was added later for some other reason, like
Typic, yeah.
a preservative?
Typically, again, it's not coming from the animal itself. It's part of processing.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it comes after the fact.
Amazing. So, yeah, and I guess whenever I think about this, I mean, the other sort of struggle without brands like Pekish is what are your choices? Whenever you go to the store. Thankfully, there is a brand like Pekish in Canada, so at least that's one solution.
Yeah, and again too, we're seeing more companies start to get into the game of building, more of these functional food as medicine, types of products. So the ecosystem is starting to evolve, so to speak. It just, again, on our end, you need that inertia, effectively to start to bring about important change. And again, on my end, it's, if I don't want to eat it, why should we offer it to someone else to eat it? It's not for us. Again, we're a for-profit company, but I always tell our staff and various stakeholders, it's responsible profit.
Mm, yeah, so important. And then just to switch gears for a second, so what's the role of the Health and Wellness Advisory Board? What is it that they have in terms of trusted professionals?
Well, again, too, when we look clinically at, how shall I put it, different diseases and different dietary or clinical recommendations, I think if you're developing, these food propositions that are intended to support people's well-being, we need to look at it from all aspects of, from the different clinical aspects. Because again, what might work for a patient or an individual that is predisposed to one disease may not work necessarily for another individual, so to speak. So again, a very simple example would be someone hypertensive versus hypotensive. One needs salt, one, arguably, oh, it needs to avoid salt. Just, very simply put.
And so you have to try and figure out and weave that very careful balance overall. And like you said, I mean, with the focus of Peqish really being around the fact that food is medicine.
Yeah, and I mean, and we'll probably touch upon this later, but again, one of the other aspects that we're seeing is that, for example, a lot of these additives, like emulsifiers, are really disrupting the internal milieu of the GI tract, leading to like changes in the biome diversity, and as a consequence of that, likely promoting a dysbiotic state. And we know that leaky gut, today, and there's lots of papers on this and lots of people talking about this, that gut brain axis is so critical. But a dysbiotic state actually, again, leads to other changes, perhaps within the liver. And then, arguably you have this compound effect that this can actually lead to, increased risk for cardiovascular disease, increased risk for, diabetes, metabolic disorders, autoimmune conditions. So, again, we need to make sure that we're supporting people's well-being and nurturing that biome that resides within the gut.
Yeah, absolutely critical. And I mean, in a way, that's a good transition to my next question, which is, what aspects do you consider whenever you're developing a new product or a new recipe? How do you look at that?
Yeah, and we've touched a little bit upon this. So the first thing, when people come to us and ask us, for example, oh, can you make, this type of food? It's certainly, we can explore it. And so again, understanding, okay, know, who are you trying to feed this to? Is one of the first things. Because again, that ties into like the cultural aspects and the familiarity. If for example you're trying to create something that again the culture won't appreciate or associate or repurchase, it's a problem. So that's the first thing. So it has to like basically be almost like that comfort food. The other aspect, with that is, when you're putting it together visually, you eat with your eyes first, and so it needs to look good, and then arguably it needs to taste good, right? Because if it doesn't taste good, people are not going to repurchase it. And we've seen that with a lot of different products. And then, kind of coupled with that as a benefit of like, consuming products that we make, again, they're better and intended to be healthier for you than the other, products that exist within, the categories that we operate in, the product categories that we operate in. So we'll look at, again, we talked about this ingredient selection, desired nutritional profile, the taste, you know, what's the health benefit that we're going after and the group that we're trying to, how shall I put it, support, coupled with that as well, you know, the extent of processing, because again, and there's a lot of data on this, but ultra processed foods, for example, and poor quality diets are cited to wreak havoc on human welfare. When I hear statements or read statements in like publication, peer reviewed publications, where it states that like ultra processed foods and poor quality diets pose a greater risk to humanity than unsafe sex, alcohol, drugs, and tobacco use combined, it's like, wow, how is that even possible? And what are we doing to change that? We need to change that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I could tell you that. I mean, so this podcast, we're only what four episodes in at this point. It's definitely had an impact on me whenever I mean, I just came back from travel. I went to New York, I went to New Orleans, and in both kind of trips. I'm sitting there, if we were eating at a restaurant, I'm looking at the menu going, okay, how could I possibly balance this out? In some cases it's a little tougher, and it was for me anyway in New Orleans. And then, in other cases, whenever I was in New York, I felt like there were healthy selections, but you had to be purposeful to try and sort of drive your way there, to kind of go back to the comfort food, sort of thing that you mentioned just a moment ago. And so when you go through this process and you're developing a new product or a new recipe, then do you also sort of have to test it with people to know, or do you just put it kind of out in the wild and see what happens?
No, it's there's iterative design and tweaking, so to speak, and that's again, so our philosophy centers on leveraging, two important stakeholders, the doctors and then the chefs, like that combine together to create like purposely, driven food, so to speak. And again, we'll do internal testing, and then we'll actually do external testing, like with select, groups, and then we'll actually do broader testing. And actually, with our new products, we actually put a QR code on it so that individuals can actually scan it and provide feedback through an online survey that we ask them to fill out.
Oh, very cool. And then, whenever you're sourcing these things, I mean, do you find yourself sort of building out this continuum now of things that you can leverage in future recipes? I guess, an example would be, you could have let's say a breakfast sandwich that has the ham that you mentioned a moment ago, and then you kind of switch to, lunch or dinner sort of, selection that also uses the same, ham product maybe.
Yeah, no, and again, too, that's something that we do look at, leveraging. And, as you're well aware, one of the other things that became very critical for us to be able to impact the masses and the different profiles, again, Peqish trying to create everything on its own, like it's a mammoth project and undertaking. And, we've been at this for, a number of years. And so one of the things that we, did to counteract, having to have Pekish create all this stuff, was to build, the technology Naohi, our scoring algorithm that allows us to not only certify, products that are deemed to be better or healthier for you, but as we do that, then we're able to actually bring some of those, ingredients, into, our fold or mix, and actually leverage those to build, other, products to expand the repertoire, if you will. So certainly, as it relates to existing ingredients, we do look at how we can leverage them across different, meal types. But with the certification, we're already seeing that not only can we, essentially bring some of these other products in and make, new products very efficiently, but it's also creating an opportunity for us to pair different brand products, together. So we were actually looking, again, one of the brands that you'll feature in a subsequent, interview here, Babs. They're a meat alternative, but it's not like your traditional like meat alternatives that are laden with chemicals. It's real whole ingredients. We're working with them where, again, we're bringing, some a breakfast sandwich, forward, leveraging, their plant-based, product, or plant-rich product, actually, because I don't even like the word plant-based, because, again, that is not what, there's so many plant-based products out there that are all derivatives. So we say plant-rich because it's actually made of real plant, ingredients, so to speak. So we're pairing, that the Babs proposition with, another product from one of the other brands that they make a very, nice vegan cream cheese. And so we've got, a very nice vegan breakfast sandwich that we'll offer. And again, so we'll see, for example, through our work, an amplification of products that we can actually put forth to the community.
Well, you're making me hungry. I haven't yet had dinner yet. Still almost 5:30 now where I'm at 4:30 where you're at, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm still
yeah.
working our way towards dinner here. And so, I mean, I guess to talk about a little bit more about the sourcing practices, and then the challenges that you've had. Um, your scoring system, how does it sort of evaluate an overall product whenever you're trying to source it?
Yeah, so Naohi looks at food, in three, specific ways. It looks at what we refer to as the clinical intent, right? So what is it that the brand is doing with that product and who are they trying to serve? And does it actually have the data, for example, to substantiate, any of the corresponding better for you or health claims that they're advocating for? The other aspect is that we will look at the nutritional profile of the product, beyond, for example, what's just listed there. Because again, too, we can talk about protein, we can talk about fiber, we can talk about salt, but it's holistically how the product works together, as a single entity, right? So we actually have, within that portion of the scoring system, we look at the interactions between the amount of fiber versus the amount of fat versus the amount of protein, versus the amount of carbohydrate, and there's, a ratio that we're actually looking for. So we've built it. We're going to continue to optimize and train the scoring system as well to ensure that it has, the highest, predictive capacity, leveraging a bit more of like an AI component, to it. And
Oh,
then the last thing,
very cool.
sorry, the last thing again, and importantly, is processing. How is the food actually processed for human consumption? Because again, and there's other scoring systems out there like Nova, for example, that look at processing. So we look at, for example, is it no processing? Is it minimally processed? Or is it significantly processed or ultra processed? And then within that silo too, again, like, how is it preserved? Right?
Hmm.
Like, are there lots of chemicals? So the scoring system also has, for example, based upon, it's almost like a relative risk based on the different preservatives or additives, where, some is deemed to be like no use, like moderate use, or, it's free, it's more safe to use it. So we're building more of a logic based component to scoring the products.
Interesting. And then whenever you look at like the chemicals that could be in food that are not so obvious to consumers, what are some of those examples that people might see?
Yeah, I guess just kind of thinking on my end, again, we're very prescriptive in the list of our like ingredients, but again, when I read a label, for example, and I see like certain things like natural flavoring, okay,
Mm.
what does natural flavoring mean? Or spices, right? Like, again, too, like something simple as spices, they have like additives in it as well. So like even selecting like spices, I don't want to see any silicon dioxide in it, right? Like, or again, or other things that they put into it. So you need to know, like, and that's one of the things that we do when I see those types of things listed. We'll ask the manufacturer, can you please disclose to us? If they're not willing to do it, well, then you're disqualified, not interested.
Yeah.
We want that transparency.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take a bit of an aside here. I mean, I know this isn't really necessarily, kind of in the mainstream part of our interview, but I guess the way that I'm thinking about this, so I've suffered with migraines for years. And when I eat certain foods, they're a definite trigger. An example, for me is if I have, Chinese food that most likely had MSG in it, it seems to trigger one. I also get, migraines as well whenever I eat. I love crab cakes more
Mm,
than anything in this world. They're tasty, but at the
they
same
are,
time, that obey, if they put obey in there, the
yeah.
next morning I'll wake up with the worst headache in my life. So I
Yeah.
mean, it just instantly sort of triggers a headache, and it makes me wonder, as you're talking about this, like, is that the trigger and not necessarily the spices that are in there, but it's things that, you know, kind of ride along with whatever they include in the spice.
Yeah, it's possible. Again, I think with MSG, there has been, a continual shift to eliminate, that from, a lot of the cuisine. I still do see it pop up, from time to time. But again, too, like, what causes the headaches? Actually, we know that again too, based upon the data, that leaky gut, like when there's an underlying issue, you're more prone to migraines,
Ah,
right? So it could just be like a trigger too, right? So again, in your case, if it persists, it's like, okay, you may want to see a gastroenterologist.
hmm, very interesting. Headaches lead you to the gastroenterologist visit. So very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to correct people's guts, so to speak, in many respects. Like, and again, like looking at it, like based upon like diseases, when you're again looking at like utilization of fecal transplants. We've talked about this before. There's
Yeah.
more and more interest from the clinical community to actually be able to leverage this as a new modality to either treat disease or to even manage therapeutic response.
Very interesting. And then what about one of the notes that I had taken from our conversation as well is just to talk about chicken comparison as well, based on Pekish's approach. What can you tell me about here?
Yeah, and it's that's interesting. That was one of those like kind of moments that I was like, what's going on? So, again, the team on my end, the culinary team had bought like product, and when it was cooked, I started to notice almost like kind of like a milky, substance kind of, coming out of it. And I was like, okay, what is that? And I'm like, I asked the team like, for visibility on it. And it turned out that again, the product that they had bought, right, to try was actually pumped with carrageenan, which is a derivative of seaweed and water. And I'm like, okay, that's a no use, right? Like, but again, just looking at, something as simple as chicken that everyone is, that assumes, okay, it's, protein. You can see like when you buy chicken, for example, that there's different degrees or percentages of protein within the chicken when it's cooked, right? And in many cases, it can be pumped with water. But when I look at it, I had gone out to the supermarket to look at some of the ready to eat like products, and I was very very astonished to see water in it, sugar, acids, starches, nitrates, oils, soy, potassium lactate, maltodextrin, artificial flavorings, sodium diacetate, sodium phosphate, yeast, mustard, gums,
Hmm.
and the list goes on. It's like, okay, why can't chicken just be chicken?
Right. Yeah.
You
Chicken
know,
and chicken the animal and not all the additional stuff. I mean,
you know,
I guess what was popping into my head originally whenever this topic came up was just, sort of chemicals given to chickens so that they will live
like
better, right? And plump up and all of that kind of stuff. But now whenever you're saying it, it's like, no, it goes even beyond that. And I wasn't thinking that that would be possible, even with regards to, I guess meat, right? So yeah,
yeah, well, and this is one of the things too. Like I tell people, okay, just because something is made in front of you or go to a restaurant, it doesn't mean that, for example, it's better for you. You don't know what is in it, right? And again, that's where on our end, like I know what is going into it because it's stuff that we make, it's stuff that we scrutinize. It's like, ew, I don't want to eat gums in my chicken.
hmm
And I'm not talking about chewing gum. I'm talking about, xanthan gum and, gar gum and, acacia and all these other, things. And even maltodextrin, which is like, more of a carbohydrate. There's actually evidence that maltodextrin actually really disrupts, the diversity in the gut.
very interesting.
So just give people chicken.
Right, give the
It,
people
it, it,
chicken.
it,
Yeah,
it's, what, it's very simple, but it's important to like draw attention to this.
yeah, absolutely. And then let's talk a little bit about common health issues that are associated with diets as well, because I mean this has come up a couple times in our conversation here. Um, you know, what is the difference that products actually make with like bloating and food coma and discomfort and things like that?
So just so I understand, like as it relates to like different health indication, like health issues, like
Yes. Yeah.
or just kind of common things that people perceive like bloating.
Well, I think I mean, I believe my question is much more associated with, health issues that are associated with it, with people's diets that lead to, bloating and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, bloating again is more of a GI related like issue, and again, is it due to the fact that you have an unhealthy biome, for example, because again, where's the gas coming from? So again, like is it bacterial derived? It's likely that that's the case, but I think when you look at every disease known to man or to humans, so to speak, that
Yeah.
again, there is a food related aspect, to it, and one of the things that and it's still again like quote unquote emerging, like in our understanding of it, and can you actually use food, obviously, as more of an adjunct to either treat disease or prevent it, so to speak, and obviously, you know some of this is probably more suited to like bring on one of the dietitians, that again we aspire to work with, so to speak. But again, just looking at it, there's specific recipes for each individual, based upon their you know underlying clinical condition.
Yeah.
And I think like food comas and things like that again are driven as a consequence of how much does a person consume. But again, I don't really know, for example, if there's anything definitive as to what causes a food coma. Like it can be overeating, it could be taxi, when you think about it, when people eat, right, which aspect of the nervous system is actually activated to facilitate digestion? It's the parasympathetic, system, so to speak. So it's the resting and digesting portion of the nervous system. So should people feel a little bit kind of, let's say, more tired after they eat? Possibly, because again, when you look at it from a physiological standpoint, the body needs to prime the gut effectively to enable digestion.
Yeah.
you know and people stressed out, like going and exercising or doing whatever after they eat, right? You're moving it from a parasympathetic to a sympathetic state, so then you're really having like a bolus of food probably sitting in your belly for quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well, so it's interesting that this conversation of how important it was to chew your food also came up with my conversation with Dr. Arun Garg as well. That
Yeah.
just the so I mean I lead a fairly hectic sort of day sometimes, and sometimes it's easier for me to grab a meal in a bottle, versus sitting down for a meal, and this whole idea of like where you eat and when you eat, and everything came up with Dr. Arun Garg, and we were talking through the sort of the process of seeing your food again, and then sort of having that opportunity to chew and process it and things like that, because I had asked him, in terms of meal based shakes, are they just in general not healthy? And his comment was, that it's very important, from a digestive standpoint, that you have that opportunity to chew. It's part of the part of the process. And here I'm thinking that I'm doing something healthy for myself. It's a vegan, meal shake that I normally have, and yeah, I mean, it's just one way to consume a meal on the go for me. But at the same time, it's like, well, that's probably not as healthy as you thought it was, Don.
Yeah, and chewing is important. The other aspect too, because again, there's certain like individuals that require blended foods, but to circumvent the need for mastication, right? Like, or chewing. But when you eat a blended drink or consume a blended drink, pardon me, you're making sugar more bioavailable and
Mm,
more readily, to be absorbed, so to speak. So like again, would I consistently make a diet of like smoothies? Probably not.
yeah.
And again, things that have no fiber, you know, and I know, like, people talk about cold press. Well, typically, if you cold press something, you're pretty much getting water and anything that's water soluble. So typically, what's water soluble is sugar and some vitamins.
Uh, yeah. And then,
So I wouldn't make. Sorry to interrupt you. I wouldn't make it like smoothies and these things like a regular part of your everyday routine personally.
right. Yeah. I
Unless you're stressed and on the go and you have no time and you need that for your source of nourishment.
sure. Yeah. I mean, and from my standpoint, it's not that hard to just sort of say, okay, so more often than not, right, I'm going to
Yeah.
not do that. But at the same time, I do know the sort of complications that come along with it. Just like I know occasionally whenever I really want that steak, I typically am going to go have steak and not not think about it.
Again, the data as it relates to red meat, arguably from studies suggests that, and I think we've talked about this, daily, like again, daily consumption of red meat, based upon studies, 22 grams, so less than an ounce a day. So if you choose to like eat red meat, then maybe one like 6 or 7 ounce steak per week is more than enough.
Yeah, I don't even know that I have it that often, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
my wife and I had this conversation after you and I had the conversation too that,
yeah,
a petite steak in the United States is probably about as big as of a portion as you're describing here. So it's pretty
yeah.
small
Yeah,
compared
don't
to
go and
that.
have a tomahawk. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, that thing that covers your plate looks like it would
yeah,
tip over the Flintstone car.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so then let's talk about associations between food and disease as well. I mean, you've mentioned leaky gut quite a few times. There are a lot of things that I believe that have come up in the different conversations, but probably important that we cover it here as well.
Yeah, again, when we look at lifestyle diseases or non-communicable diseases, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, other like autoimmune conditions, again, dementia or neurologic diseases, there is a big, interaction between gut health in these diseases. And so, again, when we're looking at this, what we put in our mouth either, can nourish us or it potentially can like create, harm, so to speak. And I think we just need to be more mindful of it, knowing that there's a connection. Something as simple as NASH or NAFLD, so non-alcohol induced fatty liver disease. Again, you're seeing fatty deposits in the liver. Typically and historically, a lot of the thought there was due to things like high fructose, but we're seeing again, that there's an inherent pressure on the liver, and then arguably when you look at that, fatty liver is obviously a precursor for the major diseases too, and the liver obviously is part of the GI tract as well. So again, it's all interconnected, and I think when you look at manifestation of disease, there's obviously on a genetic background, right? Again, in these pressures that we're experiencing day to day, and we're not just talking food, but like stress and different things. It's kind of like the spark that may ignite the fire, so to speak, collectively, that then results in the manifestation of an individual's disease, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so important overall. And then with regards to non-communicable diseases, let's just talk about those as well, more specifically. Um, are there things that we eat that will help us, sort of avoid these as well?
And again, too, I think that's a loaded question because, quite frankly, we're still immature, in that. But let's just look at something like IBS. Again, there's the FODMAP, diet that, arguably, introduces a lifestyle change that then obviously, helps out. With that, if we look at diabetes, for example, again, there are food related, let's say, activities that can be undertaken to help you, manage disease coupled with exercise. So, if someone, again, too, like, and these are more personal stories on my end, with family where, again, they're borderline type 2 and they make a lifestyle change by changing, what they consume, and starting to exercise and like reduce their BMI, and voila, what, again, they're able to manage it just with simple things like, getting more sleep, eating right, exercising, reducing your stress.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at, diseases, many of the diseases, like, again, like, how do we arguably, you know support people's journey, so to speak, and develop more of a preventative modality. I think for me, again, it's I think we're on the cusp of, obviously important change, and we'll learn more as we go, and I will bring it back to the biome. I was actually talking to a group today where they have a specific product, and they're seeing some very elegant findings in terms of changing, so by consuming a certain amount of this product daily, they're actually seeing really nice positive changes in the biome that's leading to a whole host of, things, whether it be better cognitive, ability, better skin, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're going to learn a lot more over the next 5 to 10 years, and I'm excited both from a food side, but obviously from a medical side as well, like in exploring, the utilization of food, and even the biome to, help to not only prevent diseases, but possibly, again, to manage those, more effectively as well.
Yeah, I mean, what's most interesting to me in watching the data come in from next generation sequencing, where you can actually see where things are just kind of go awry in people's DNA and RNA, based on genetic changes, and then you think back to the fact that every day we're drinking water, or drinking whatever, soft drinks or whatever it is, and then in addition to that we're eating food, we're contributing to this every single day. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that came from our parents, right? I mean, it could be something
No.
that we're just introducing ourselves to, through the food that we eat. So very interesting topic,
Yeah.
altogether.
Yeah, well, and I think just to kind of add to that, with monozygotic twins, like that are separated, at birth, they have a, entirely, similar genetic profile, but again, their environmental cues or pressures actually lead to different personality traits, and arguably even, for example, different like predispositions, clinically, to specific diseases.
Yeah, very, very, very key point, overall. So, so with that, I mean, with that statement, Dr. Anthony Marotta, thank you so much for joining me on Be Fused. I really appreciate the conversation that we had here, and thanks a lot for being here.
My pleasure. It's always nice to be here, and again, too, thank you for giving us the time to talk about Peqish and why we're different and how we're different.
Yeah, thanks so much. And so, so with that, we're gonna sign off here from YouTube.